Hi, my name is Matt, and today we'll talk about basic compositing on the Fusion page within DaVinci Resolve. This video builds on what you've already learned in the Introduction to Fusion video, so if you haven't watched that one, I'd recommend starting there and then coming back to this one. The most basic goal of compositing is to combine multiple images together to create a final result. For this first example, we're going to do a split-screen composite, where we'll combine the performance of a foreground actor with the performance of a background actor from a different take. To do this, we'll use Fusion's tracker to match move and stabilize the shots. We'll use the polygon tool to draw a mask around our actor, and we'll use the transform tool to do some fine-tune alignments to those elements. So let's take a look at our footage. So we can see two elements here stacked on video 1 and video 2. And I'm going to go ahead and define a playback region by hitting I at the beginning and then O at the end. And then I'm going to do Alt / to loop my playback, which is basically the same thing as just hitting play here. So the first thing you want to do when you're looking at footage is really analyze what's going on with all the elements to plan out what you're going to do in the composite. So for this first element, I can see take 1 has the performance of the background character in the passenger seat that we really want. So if I go ahead and disable that element by selecting it in the timeline and pressing D, we can now view take 2, which has the performance for the foreground character that we want. So now that we understand what each of the elements are for, I would say the other thing I notice about these shots is that there's a bit of camera motion. So in this shot, the camera tilts down slightly, and in take 1, if I re-enable that, the camera pans slightly. And so that tells me that we'll need to stabilize this shot and match move them together to get the final result we're looking for. In addition to that, I know I'm going to need to draw a polygon around one of our characters. So if I go ahead and just drop into the annotation tool here on the edit page, I'll probably end up drawing my polygon somewhere around here to separate our background character in the passenger seat from the foreground character. So now that we've roughly planned this out, let's dive into Fusion and get started on the shot. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and select both of these elements on the edit page, and then right-click one of them and select New Fusion Clip. And what that'll do is it'll combine both of those clips into your Fusion composition and set that up for the work you're about to do. So I select that, and now in the timeline I see Fusion Clip 2, and that has also added Fusion Clip 2 into my media pool. So now if we go to the Fusion page, I can see I've got 2 media in elements and a merge and a media out. So Resolve has done some of the work for me to set up this composition. So to just clean up my workspace a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and select this button here to just single the viewer to, so we're looking at a larger image. Next thing I'll do is I'll look at each of the media ins and determine which element is which and just do a bit of organization. So I'll select media in 1 and I'll press 2 to load it into the viewer. Then I'll play that shot back. So that shot is the performance we want from the driver. So I'll go ahead and stop playback, and I'm going to rename this media in 1 node to driver. And I do that by going to the inspector panel, right-clicking on media in 1, and selecting rename. So now I've named that node driver, so it's easier to keep track of. Let's view media in 2 by selecting it, pressing 2 to load it into the viewer, playing it back. That's our passenger element. So I'll go ahead and rename that. But instead of right-clicking in the inspector tool, I'll select media in 2, and I'll do function F2. That's the shortcut key to bring up your rename for that node. Okay. Now that I have that set up, I'm going to do a little bit of organization of my nodes. I generally like my passenger or my foreground nodes to be coming in from the top, and my background node to be organized furthest to the left of the main flow of this tree. So now that we've set up our shot, we're ready to begin work, and I'm going to go ahead and start with the passenger element. So I'll select that node, play it back. So the first thing I want to do is stabilize this camera motion to just get rid of it. So I'll go to the first frame here, and I'm going to load a tracker node. And I find that in the effects library, so I can show that panel by clicking here. And then I'll twist down the tools menu and go to the transform submenu, or sorry, the tracking submenu. And that's where I can see camera tracker, planar tracker, and Fusion's regular tracker. The Fusion tracker is kind of a workhorse of Fusion, so we're going to use that here. It's very useful in a variety of situations. So I've dragged that on the pipe that's connecting passenger to merge 1. And I'm going to go ahead and hide the effects library for now. So I want to view this tracker, so I'm going to select that node and press 2 to load it into the viewer. And what I see right away is that I already have this widget that is in the UI. So let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit closer and take a look at it. So this tracker point is made up of 2 boxes. We have an inner box here, and that box defines the pattern that the tracker is going to try to find. And the outer box is the search region where the tracker will try to find that pattern. So you can resize either of these boxes by grabbing a corner or grabbing an edge and adjusting to the size that you want. To move this point, you select this upper left-hand corner of the inner box, and you can drag it over a region you want to track. So what we want to do is we want to track the motion of the car. Now, I'm going to hit Command F to go to full screen, and let me play this back real quick. So what we see here is the car is moving because of the camera, but there's also some natural motion within the scene. This passenger is moving, the trees in the background are moving, and even this seat belt is moving a bit. We don't want to track any of those regions because they're not actually being caused by the camera motion. What we want to track is the static portions of the scene that show how the camera is moving. So in this case, that's going to be high contrast parts of the car, like this lock here. So I'll go ahead and jump to the first frame and move my tracker down to a high contrast area like you can see here. So you want to choose a high contrast pattern like this because that gives the tracker a more solid pattern to lock onto. If there wasn't much contrast, you may get false tracks or your tracker floating off the point that you really want to track. So now that we have that set up, we could track this shot, but if you only have one tracker, what happens is the tracker will just be able to solve for any translation movement. It won't be able to solve for any rotation or scale changes. So to track for scale and rotation, you'll need a minimum of 3 trackers. So I'll go ahead back to full screen, and I'm going to add 2 additional trackers by selecting the Add button in the inspector. So now I have a tracker 2 and a tracker 3. And I need to find additional high contrast points to track, ideally that are fairly far away from the first tracker. That way you get a more extreme change for the solve. So I'll go ahead and choose this area of the seat belt. And I think I'll choose this area of the shadow. And I'm going to go ahead and play back before I track just to make sure I'm not tracking anything. Like this seat belt's moving on its own and I'm not tracking that region, so it looks like I'm good. So I'll jump back to the first frame and I will select the track forward button. So the track forward button will track forward from the first frame no matter where you are. The button next to it is the track forward from current time, and that'd be useful if you were tracking from a part in the middle of the clip. So in this case, we're starting for the first frame, so I'm going to go ahead and choose track forward. Okay, track is done. And now you can see if we play back, these tracked points track nicely with the high contrast areas they were supposed to be attached to. The camera motion is still there, so to remove that, we need to go to the tracker in the inspector, and from here we click on the operation tab, where we can apply an operation based off those trackers. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that down, and I want to select match move. And then within match move, we have various merge operations. Background only will stabilize the background input. So foreground over background will actually do a merge operation with the foreground over the background, adjusting the foreground's motion based off of the tracker that we've already done. We'll show that a little bit later in this video. So I'm going to go ahead and select background, and then let's play back to see our result. So now it looks like the car is very steady. It's not moving anywhere, which is exactly what we're looking for. The next thing we want to do to prepare this element to be composite over the top of the driver element is we want to cut out our background character here. So what I'm going to do is create a polygon tool, which will allow me to draw around the region I want to create a matte for. So I'm going to go to the effects library, and I'm going to go to the mask menu. And here there's various forms of masks we can choose from. I'm going to go ahead and choose the polygon tool and drag it into my flow here. And I'm going to hide my effects library. So I'm going to zoom out a bit, and I'm going to draw a polygon roughly where I decided to do it earlier. We'll refine this a bit more later. And what I'm doing here, when I'm clicking to lay down a point, I am holding that click and I'm dragging it to actually create a nice curve. So if I just click and release, I'll create a very sharp angle. So I generally tend to click and drag to always create smooth edges. So now that I have that, I'm going to actually load this polygon into the viewer so I can see how it looks. And instead of pressing the keyboard to do that, I'm going to go ahead and grab this node and drag it into the viewer and release. And that'll load that node into the viewer. So I can see this is where I've defined the matte. So white is going to define the region that I want to keep, and black is defining the region that is going to be removed. So last thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of edge softness to this matte. So I'm just going to drag this a bit, and now I've got a nice soft edge here, and that's going to help the transition from one of the elements to the other. So I'll hit Command F to go back to full screen, and let's view our tracker node. And to actually cut out this character, I need to connect this polygon to the passenger media in node. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and drag the output of the polygon and attach it to the mask input of the passenger. So now we can see we've isolated that part of the shot. If we play that back, seems like we're getting what we want. We'll come back a little bit later to refine that further. So now that we have our background character prepared, we can go ahead and work on our driver. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and select my driver node, load it into the viewer, and watch this element down. So there's a bit of camera motion in this shot as well. Now I need to track that motion, but ultimately I want to keep this camera motion, but I want to have the other element, the passenger, match this camera movement. We'll go to our effects library and go back to our tracking bin and pull in a tracker and drop it on the flow between the driver and the merge. And I want to view that, so I'll select tracker 2 and press 2. And I get my tracker automatically created here. I'm going to choose very similar points as I did in the first tracker. Let me jump to the first frame, and looks like I've lost a bit of light over here, so it's not so high contrast on this lock. So I'm going to actually track this part of the pillar instead. And that's got a pretty good pattern to lock onto. And because I want to track rotation and scaling as well, I'm going to add 2 additional trackers and put them in the same rough positions as I had the other. Okay, now that's ready to track. I'll go ahead and track forward from the first frame. And that's looking good. All the points seem to track to the regions that I wanted them to. Back to full screen. To check the track that you've already done, it is useful still to go to the operation mode, and then we can change that to match move and then background only. This is what I use to just make sure my track is looking good. If my track is looking good, then this car shouldn't be moving at all. But as I mentioned earlier, I want to keep this camera move, but I want to apply this camera move to the passenger element. So to do that, what I can do is I'll change my merge operation from background only to foreground over background. And what that'll do is it'll take the tracking information from the driver element and apply it to the passenger element. So before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and connect my passenger output and connect it to my tracker 2 foreground input. And now I can change my merge operation from background only to foreground over background. And now I've got the foreground composited over the background and tracked into place. So once I play this back, now I've retained the camera motion of the foreground actor, but the background character is moving in sync. And just so you can see what it would look like, let me change this merge operation to foreground only. And you can see that this passenger now has the camera motion, but that camera motion matches what was on the driver element. That can be useful, but in this case, we're going to go ahead and just handle the merge right within the tracker node itself. So I'll change this back to foreground over background. Now that I've done that, I can actually delete the merge node because we're actually achieving that merge within the tracker node itself. So I'll delete that and reorganize things a bit. And then once we're at this place, let's watch down the shot and see what kind of refinements we have to do. I can see that this soft edge here is maybe too soft, and we're also seeing a bit of the passenger coming through from the driver element. So let's adjust that a bit by adjusting our polygon. Now you want to make sure you adjust your polygon on the frame you originally drew the polygon. So in this case, I can see that there's a keyframe marked on frame 3. And I can also look in the inspector and I can see that there is an animation for the shape. And if I select this caret, I'll navigate straight to frame 3. Now, if I modify that polygon, it's going to change that polygon instead of adding a new keyframe automatically. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in and adjust this polygon a bit. Okay, that seems like that's looking good. And I'll play back. And it looks like I'm not seeing any of the passenger from the foreground element or from the driver element anymore. So that's looking good. Let me go ahead and hide this overlay by deselecting the polygon. Play that back. Yeah, it looks like we're looking pretty good. If there were any alignment issues between this foreground and background element, you could refine it a little bit further. And actually, for example, I'll go ahead and just adjust this a bit so we can see if there's any alignment issues. Yeah, so you can see that our door frame here is a bit higher in one element than it is in the other element. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, while the shot may work without doing this alignment, I'm going to go ahead and do some additional refinement just to make it perfectly aligned. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and add a transform node on our passenger after this tracker. Instead of using the effects library this time, I'm going to go ahead and bring up a pop-up that allow me to search the tools that are available in Fusion. I do that by hitting Shift Space, and that brings up my tool selection. And there I can enter in transform to bring up a transform tool. Now when I click add, it will add it directly after the tracker 1. because tracker 1 is selected. So now I've got my transform added into the flow there. And from there, I can adjust it as I see fit. Now to do this, I'm going to go ahead and use the split screen viewer to make this process a little bit easier. So I'm going to activate the split screen viewer, and what that'll allow me to do is load 2 nodes at the same time into the same viewer and wipe between them. So I'm going to go ahead and load the driver element into the A side, and I'm going to load the transform 1 node into the B side. And then I can use this wipe to actually compare the two. And now we can really see this car isn't perfectly aligned. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the transform tool to move that element up slightly. Now we're looking closer. And it does look like the scale is a bit off, although the alignment's looking good. So I'm going to adjust the scale so this part of the window frame matches a bit better. And I'm going to do that in the inspector by clicking inside the text box and just dragging it down ever so slightly. I can use this slider here. That would actually do more extreme changes. If I want to do a very fine-tune adjustment, I would click and drag inside the value entry area. So that's looking a little bit better. Let me wipe between those two. That's looking a lot closer than before, so I think we're pretty good to go. Now to get out of the split screen view, I go ahead and click this button again to deactivate it. And now let's view the results in our tracker node. So I'm going to click that and press 2 to load it into the viewer. Command F to go full screen, and then play. So now our alignment's much better. I do see that there's a bit of fringe coming in there, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust my polygon one more time. There we go. Oh, and I added it on the wrong frame. So you can see here I've done this adjustment on frame 2, but I also have a keyframe on frame 3. So what's going to happen if I go to frame 3, it's going to animate. I don't actually want that to happen. So I'm going to go back to frame 2 here, and I'm going to remove that keyframe by clicking there. And now I'm going to go to frame 3 and do my final adjustment. And that should do exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, now our shot's looking pretty good. Let me play this back one more time because there's one last task that we'll have to do. So we can see here on the bottom edge of the frame, we're getting a bit of a double image. And what's happening there is our passenger element is a bit smaller or a bit shifted up from our driver element. So what we need to do is actually blow up the image slightly just to crop out those edges. So I'm going to add a transform node after this tracker 2 node. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead this time, instead of using the effects library or the tool search menu, I'm going to go ahead and use our toolbar here and drag the node directly down into the flow where I want it. So let's view that node by dragging it into the viewer and releasing. And now we're viewing the transform node. And I'm going to just scale up the image slightly to crop out this double image we're seeing here. Okay. And now we'll play back and see if that's giving us the result we want. Yep, I can't see any frame edges anywhere. The shot's looking good. So we created a fusion composition that brought in 2 elements, our driver and passenger. We renamed both of those media ends appropriately. We used our tracker 1 to stabilize the passenger. And then we added a polygon to the passenger mask input to cut out just the passenger and remove the driver. And then we added a tracker where we tracked the driver's motion, but we used a different mode in the tracker to actually merge the foreground over the background, which uses the driver's tracking information to match move the foreground. And then finally, we added a transform on the passenger side of things to align her element a bit closer. And we used a final transform to crop out any of the edges of frame that we were seeing from the passenger element. That created our final composition. So that's how we did our split screen, which is a very common task in compositing, combining multiple images together to create a final result. Another very common task in compositing is to replace a sky that was shot on the day with one that matches other shots more closely, or one that just looks better. To do this task, we'll use a luma keyer, we'll use some map manipulation tools like a road dilate and map control, and we'll have to match move the sky, but instead of using a tracker node this time, we'll use a tracker modifier within the merge node to do that operation. So let's take a look at the footage. So here we have two elements stacked over each other, and I'll go ahead and set an in point and an out point just to loop that. So we've got our characters here, and we have a very blown out sky. It doesn't look very appealing at all. And then below that element, if I select the one on track 2 and hit D to disable it, I can now see the sky. So we have a sky element that we want to use to replace the sky that was originally shot on the day. And like any other shots you're starting for the first time, we really want to look at the footage and analyze it to determine how we're going to do the work that we're going to do. So in this case, as I'm looking at this foreground element, the sky is very, very bright. So it seems like I'll be able to use a luma keyer to key out all the brightest parts of the image to then insert the new sky. So that's one part of the plan. The other part of the plan is there's some camera motion. So I know I'm going to need to track this plate to match move the sky element to it. This sky element is just an individual TIFF, so there's no camera motion built in there. So that's the rough plan for this shot. So if I disable the foreground element here on track 2, I can now see the sky element. Now, sky looks great, but there's a bunch of these mountains and buildings that we don't really want. So what we can do is select that clip and go into the inspector and scale that up, or zoom to, let me pause that, to crop out all the unwanted parts of the image. So if I go ahead and hit this disclosure in the media pool, it'll tell me the resolution. Well, the resolution is much bigger. It's 3,800 pixels wide or so, whereas the actual footage itself is HD footage. So the thing to consider here is that Fusion, if we take these two clips and like the last shot, we create a new Fusion clip and then go to the Fusion page, we're creating a composition that's the same resolution as the timeline, which in this case is HD. That works fine for this foreground element, but our background element is actually at HD when there's a lot more resolution that's available to us. So there's a slightly different way to handle things so that you maintain resolution of all the source files independently. The other thing to consider here too is when you're creating a new Fusion clip from the edit page, if you do any size changes on the edit page, it'll crop the image here. So if we ever wanted to change how far we were zoomed in on the image, we couldn't do that at this point. So let's say I added a transform node and I viewed that and I wanted to change and zoom out a bit more. Well, the image has been cropped, and that crop happened on the edit page. So what we're going to do is we're just going to reverse out of this and undo everything we did, and instead of actually making a new Fusion clip here, we're going to go ahead and disable the foreground, and then we're going to go directly to the Fusion page. What that'll do is that it will make a Fusion composition that matches the resolution of the clip that's in the timeline. So before we jump into our shot, let's talk a little bit about resolution independence. So in this case, we've got a foreground element and a background element. And if we look in the media pool where these files came from, I can click on this little 3-dot metadata menu here, and it will show me the resolution. I can see that the foreground clip is HD, and this sky frame is over HD. It's 3,800 pixels or so wide. So we want to keep resolution independence and the full resolution of those source files. Now, if we created this fusion clip like we did on the last shot, what it will do is it will actually resize all the elements to the timeline resolution. So let me do that real quick and show you what that looks like. So if I go ahead and select both clips and I say create new fusion clip, it'll create a fusion clip, and then I go to the fusion page. And on the upper right hand corner in my viewer, I can see that I've got an HD image, and that's based off of what the timeline resolution is. And each of these elements, if I view them independently, well, even this sky element is HD, even though the original version of that sky element was about 3,800 pixels wide. So we want to actually retain all that resolution for as long as we can. So let's go back to the edit page and undo what I just did. So instead of making a new fusion clip, you can actually go directly to the fusion page and work that way. So I'm going to disable the foreground clip, and now when I go to the fusion page, it's going to set the composition's resolution based off of the clip that's visible in the timeline, which in this case is the sky, which is at about 3,800 pixels wide. So if I go to the fusion page, now I only have one media in node, but my composition resolution is 3,800 pixels wide, which is exactly what I'm looking for. I want to maintain that resolution of this sky element. So I'll hit Command F to go to full screen. I still need to get my foreground element, and I can do that by opening up my media pool panel and then dragging in this element into my flow. And so now I have a media in too. If I load that into the viewer, I can see that it maintains its original resolution of HD. And so this is how you would make sure that all the elements that you're bringing in maintain their highest resolution, is you would actually add them directly from the media pool. Let's do a little bit of organization in this fusion comp. So this media in 2, I'm going to go ahead and rename that to foreground. And I'll rename my media in 1 after loading into the viewer as sky. Now that I have both these elements, I can go ahead and hide the media panel. And now I'm going to go to full screen, Command F to go to full screen. And I know I want to composite my foreground over my sky, so I'm going to go ahead and add a merge node. And I'm going to do that by actually dragging the output of my foreground node and attaching it to the output of my sky node, and that'll automatically create a merge node for me. So if I view that, I can now see that my foreground is smaller in frame than my sky. And that makes sense because my canvas right now is 3,800 pixels wide, whereas this foreground element is only HD. Now, the one thing is we want the final output of this composition to be HD because it's going to go back to the timeline as HD, and we want that to match the foreground resolution. So the way to make sure that your composition output matches a particular resolution, in this case HD, is that the first element in your node tree has to be a HD element. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and make a background node to act as our first element in this processing tree. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and drag in a background node from my tool panel here. And I'm going to view that. Currently, this background node, it matches the resolution of the composition, which is 3,800 pixels wide. If I want to modify this, I can do that in my inspector by clicking Image. And then I can see I have my resolution here, 3,800 by 2,100 roughly. If I want to override that, I have to deselect Auto Resolution, and then I can type in the resolution that I want. You can see now I have a canvas that's 1920 by 1080, and all I need to do now is add a merge node. So I'll do that with Shift Enter to bring up my tool search, type in merge, And I'll connect this background to the background input of that merge, and this sky to the foreground input of that merge. Now, if I view that merge, I have the sky inside of an HD canvas. Now, this green border, this green box that's outside of the canvas, actually defines the available image from the sky. So we're not losing any of the resolution or the image that we had before. We're maintaining all of it. It's just not shown in the canvas. So if there was a transform, we could bring that back into the frame. So in this case, you can see we have all that sky available to us. So I'll just go ahead and undo that. Last thing we need to do to prep this node tree is change our background input from merge 1 to actually come from merge 2. And now if we view this merge 1, we've got our foreground over our background. So we can't see the sky that we want to replace. What we need to do is key out the sky from the foreground so we can see through it to the sky that's underneath. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and add a luma keyer. I'm going to make a little bit of space in my comp. And I'm going to find the luma keyer under the effects library, tools, and then matte. You'll see there's a variety of different keyers here. The luma keyer is the one we want. We'll drop it into the flow. So the luma keyer, it's going to try to create an alpha matte by a particular channel. In this case, it's going to be luminance, so that'll be the overall brightness of the image. You can also select an individual channel like blue, green, red, alpha, etc. But in this case, luma should give us what we want. So instead of viewing the RGB image here, we're going to want to view the alpha channel instead. So I'm going to view only the alpha channel that's being created by selecting this drop-down and selecting alpha. I'm still viewing the merge node. Actually, what I want to view is the luma keyer, so I'm going to go ahead and select that and press 2. And now you can see that the matte we're creating, the alpha we're creating, is based off the luminance of the image. I'm also going to hide my effects library. I want to adjust this so all this foreground stuff is totally black and our sky is totally white. So to do that, I will drag my low to the right. And then I'll drag the high down a bit as well. So I'm pretty well isolating the sky. Now we still see a lot of bright spots in the foreground part of the image that we don't want to key out. So what we can do at this point is actually adjust this matte. And we're going to do that with a tool called Erode Dilate. So we're going to add Erode Dilate from the effects library. So we're going to reveal the effects library, and then Erode Dilate is going to be found under filter. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that in to the flow here. Let's view that node. And so what Erode Dilate will do is it will grow or shrink your matte accordingly. So if I go to the amount here, I can shrink that. And what that does is it actually eliminates a lot of those small holes we were seeing in our matte. So I've pretty much eliminated all of those little holes in the alpha that we didn't really want. What I've done though is that's actually eroded this edge. So we want to restore that edge from where it was. So I'm going to add another Erode Dilate. And let me make a little bit more room in my comp. So I'm going to add another Erode Dilate after that one and view it. And so what I want to do now is I want to bring this edge back. And let me go ahead and reset that and zoom in. So as I drag this to the right, I'm dilating out that matte now. And doing so is going to bring our edge closer to where it really should be. So roughly there. So instead of viewing my alpha, let's view the RGB. And we can see here, we're not seeing the foreground at all. But we have a really nice matte we've prepared. So what we can do is we can actually combine this matte we've created, this alpha, with the original RGB image and then do some manipulation from there. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and organize all these three nodes over to the right. These were the nodes I used to generate this matte in the first place. and I'm going to add a node called matte control. And so matte control is found under the matte bin. I'm going to drag that in under the foreground here. And I'm going to feed the foreground into the background input of matte control. And then I'm going to feed my erode dilate output, which has my fully prepared alpha, into the foreground input of matte control. So I am just attaching that to the green part here, the green input. And let's view that matte control. So now I have my RGB image. I need to set my combine mode to combine alpha. And now I've got my RGB image. And then if I view only the alpha channel, I have my matte. I can still kind of see my foreground here, and that's because I still have the full RGB image and I've just combined the alpha into this node, but I actually haven't multiplied the image. So multiplication basically means deleting out anything that's black and retaining anything that's white, and then having a gradation of that in between for anything that's not perfectly black or white. So I'm going to go ahead and click post multiply. That's giving me just the sky. I actually want the foreground in this case. So I'm going to select invert matte. And now I have my foreground. So I've got my foreground cut out. If I zoom in, that's giving me roughly what I want, but it's a really hard edge. So I'm going to go back to my luma keyer and I'm going to go ahead and add a blur to that. And now I've got a nice soft edge around the characters. So that's a good place to start. Let's go ahead and do Command F to go full screen and hide our effects library. And let's play that back and see what we're looking at. So far, so good. And to double check my matte for any additional holes that may have popped up, I'm going to go ahead and load my erode dilate into the viewer. And as I play it back, it's looking really good, but I do have some edges here that are still poking through. And that's probably because I added that blur. So what I'm going to do to fix those remaining holes is I'm going to actually create a polygon mask to isolate the areas that I don't want to keep and subtract that out of that key. So to do that, I'm going to go to my first frame here. I'm going to add a polygon tool with Shift Enter to bring up my tool search and type in polygon. Press Enter. Now I've got a polygon tool and I'll just draw a very rough polygon here to define the region that I don't want to keep. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of softness to that. Now the polygon node acts like a background node in that it conforms to the resolution of the composition. So let's go ahead and view that polygon node. Load it into the viewer, and if I zoom out, I can see the resolution of that is 3800 pixels wide. My image is actually an HD image I'm keying right now, so I want this to actually conform to an HD frame. So to do that, I go to my image tab on the polygon tool, and I choose my output size instead of default to be custom. And from there, I can disable use frame format settings and set my width and height to the resolution I want. Okay, so I have 1920 by 1080. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Let's view our erode dilate again. And I want to feed this polygon tool into my luma keyer into the garbage matte input, which basically is defining the garbage, so to speak, that you don't want to be part of that tool. So instead of dragging the output of the polygon tool and attaching it to one of these inputs, I'm going to go ahead and click and drag this output while holding Alt, and then just drag it over this tool and then release my left click mouse button. And what that'll do is it'll bring up a context menu that'll allow me to select an input. So in this case, I want to select garbage matte. This can be really useful if a tool has a lot of inputs and you want to find a particular input, but the colors really aren't helping you, such as in this case, garbage matte is one of the gray inputs. So it's a little hard to find. So the polygon tool is attached to the garbage mat, and now we can see that all of those kind of defocused areas that were there are now gone. So if I play through this clip, I'm getting a much better result. I can see a little bit is still peeking in there at the end. So what I'll do is I'll go back to the frame where I originally drew this polygon. And I'll just adjust this spline a bit to get a little bit closer to our actual edge. And now let's play back to see what we have. Oh, maybe a little bit more. Seems like there's just a bright spot that pops up there at the end. Playing that back. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Okay, so now let's view our mat control node again. That's giving us the result we want. And we want to change the input to our merge node from the erode dilate to this mat control. So I'll go ahead and drag the output of the mat control onto the foreground input of the merge 1. And let's view that merge 1. And now we've got our sky behind our actors. That's getting us going in the right direction. It's still not perfect. The sky looks fairly fake at this point, and it's also not moving. So the sky needs to move in conjunction with the foreground element. So we're going to do a bit of tracking here. So let's do a quick recap on what we've done so far. I'll go ahead and pause playback here. We brought in our sky node, which I'll load into the viewer, which was very high resolution. We did that so we were going to be resolution independent. We're merging that over a background node that we set to be HD resolution. And then we brought in our foreground node, which has our actors. We did some luma keying work to key out the sky. And then we did some dilation to improve and remove some of the remaining foreground bright parts, which we did with the erode. And then we did a second erode to bring our edge back to where it was. And then we also added a polygon as a garbage mat to the luma keyer to get all the last bits that were still left over from the processes before. So all that was to generate the alpha that we then combine with our original foreground using the mat control node. And so we're combining that in the mat control node by setting the combine operation to combine alpha. And then we have to post-multiply that image to remove the parts of the shot that we don't want based off of the alpha that we generated. And then we had to actually invert that mat because we had selected the sky and we wanted to actually keep the foreground and not the sky. So the invert allowed us to do that. So instead of using a tracker node itself, we're actually going to use the tracker functionality embedded within another tool using a modifier. So let's get into that. So I've selected the merge to node, and what I want to do is actually attach a tracker to this merge center. So if I right click on the merge center in the viewer and go down to merge center in the context menu, and then go to modify with tracker position, that will create a tracker within this node that I could then use to track the foreground and apply that motion to the sky. So I've created that. And what I see here is a tracker pops up on the screen, and also this modifier in the inspector shows up as well. So I'll go ahead and click on modifiers, and this looks like just the regular tracker inspector menu that you would expect to see if you use the node directly. So I can choose my tracker source. Instead of the background, I actually want to track the foreground. So I can load it as a tracker source by dragging that node into the inspector and then releasing, and now I'll be tracking the foreground. I also want to view the foreground because that's what I'm going to be tracking, so I'll go ahead and select foreground, load it into the viewer, and then click back on my merge to and go to the modifiers page to start my track. I want to choose a high contrast area, so I'll choose this part of the rocks and adjust my search region and my pattern And I'm going to go ahead and track forward from the first frame. Okay, now the track completed. Let's go ahead and look and see how that track looks. As I play back, it's going very well. It's saying attached until a little bit further along here, the actor crosses in front of the tracker. So that's a pretty common issue that happens just over the last few frames. Let me jump to the end here. And I'm going to step back with the back bracket or the left bracket button. We can see the tracker's great up until about that frame, and I can see the center has popped off its original location. So let me go back one frame. Now you can fix this by actually changing the region of where you're going to track. And to do that, we're going to go to the inspector, expand the tracker, and what we need to do is change the path center to track center append. And what that'll allow us to do is it'll allow us to change the region that's being tracked, but still keep the same anchor point. So I'm going to go ahead and find a different area of the image to track. I'll just choose this part of the mountain because the actor is not over it at this point. And so from here, I just need to track these last few frames that had issues. So instead of using the track forward button, which would start from the very beginning, I'm going to use the track forward from current time button. So it will overwrite the bad keyframes and place new keyframes based off this new region. So let's click that button. All right. So now as we play back, we can see this tracker sticks really nicely all the way through the clip. And even when the actor moves in front of it, it doesn't get modified. Okay, let's go back to full screen with Command F. Now that we have our tracker, let's go ahead and view this merge node and see what it's doing. So as I'm viewing that, I can see now the sky has inherited the motion of that foreground element. So just to recap, instead of using a tracker node, we created a tracker modifier to modify the merge center by right-clicking on the merge center and going to modify with and selecting tracker position. And that will embed a tracker that you can then interact with in the modifiers page. So now that we've applied that tracker, let's view our last merge in this tree and see what we're looking like. It looks like the sky is tracking really well. It stays attached to the foreground. It still doesn't look that perfect. It kind of looks like it's pasted in there instead of really blending with the original shot. So we're going to do some additional work to make this sky blend better with the original. So there's some tricks we're going to do to actually allow the sky to blend better with the original image. And so we'll start off by mixing in a bit of the original sky, which will help the new sky blend better. So we'll do that by adding a merge node. So let me make a little bit of room in my composition here. And I'm going to add a merge node after this merge 2. And I'll go ahead and just find that with my tool search menu. And then I'm going to attach the foreground input of this to the foreground element directly. Now let's view that merge 3. And we can see that we're not even seeing any of the sky there. What we want to do is actually bring down the opacity of the foreground a bit so that we're controlling the mix between the replacement sky and the original sky. So I'm going to go ahead and select this merge 3, go to the blend control, and drag that down a bit. So something about there. So right now, we've blended in the original sky with the new sky, and that's brightening up the new sky a bit and making it match a little bit better. Let's view our merge 1 node. And we can see already that it's looking better than it was before. And just to do a quick comparison on the before and after, I'll select my merge 3 node And I'll hit the disable and enable button here. And we can see that's already a more convincing result for the new sky. What I do see though, however, is our edges have a bit of a kind of a halo around them, so that's not quite matching yet. We can make that match a little bit closer using another merge node, but let me talk a little bit about why you would do that and what's the theory behind it. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the dual viewer mode. So I'm going to load the current status of the background sky into the left viewer. And actually, I'm going to do a split screen comparison in this left viewer. So I'm going to click that button, and I'm going to load the foreground into the right side of that viewer. So as I wipe between these, I can see that the sky replacement is a bit darker than the original sky, and that these rocky edges are darker than they are in the sky replacement. So what I can do is actually create a merge node that will compare the two images and keep just the darker pixels between them. So what that'll do is if I keep the darker pixels, that'll keep the sky. And if I keep the darker pixels from the foreground, that's just going to keep this rocky edge and not the sky. So let's go ahead and add that node and do that. So I'm going to select merge 3. I'm going to add a merge node with my tool search. And I'm going to connect my foreground to my foreground input of the merge node. So let me load this merge 4 into this right buffer here. And instead of a normal operation, I want to use the darken operator. The darken will look at each the background and the foreground inputs, and it will keep the darker of the two pixels. So I'll select darken. And now I've got a nice sky and I've got my edges, which is exactly what I want. And in the right viewer, I can see merge 2, which now doesn't have that halo issue we were seeing earlier. So we're looking pretty darn good. I'm going to go back to a single viewer by clicking this button. And let's see what our final result's looking like. It's looking pretty darn good. I would say I need to maybe blend in a little bit more of the original sky. So I'm going to select my merge 3 node, and I'm going to just move this blend up a bit. So that's a little bit more convincing for me. And we retain our nice edges along the mountainside here. And that sky looks like it actually now fits and tracks well into the image. And that's how you do a basic sky replacement in Fusion. So to recap, we brought in all of our individual elements. We keyed the foreground. We did some manipulation to that matte to composite it over the sky. Then we used a tracker modifier on our merge 2 node to match move the sky to the foreground element. And then we did some additional compositing with the merge nodes to blend the sky better with the original sky. And that's what we achieved through merge 3 and merge 4 to give us our final result, which we're seeing right here. So thank you for joining me in compositing this split screen shot and the sky replacement. If you have additional questions, please check out our forum where the developers and professional users are interacting with each other on a daily basis. Thanks again.